Welcome to Portals of Perception and to the Universalis Project episode 13. And we are calling this episode Decoding the Current of the Epoch. Karen, Kyriaki, welcome.
Yes, welcome Aviv, and welcome Kyriaki, and it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon.
Hello Karen, hello Aviv, good to be with you. As always, looking forward to what wants to appear today.
Well, thank you very much for joining me on this adventure today. Let me try and describe what I have in mind as the outline. I'd like to begin by describing what brings us today to this conversation, what occurred, and why are we proposing that we call this Decoding the Current of the Epoch. Then I will trace back to and recapitulate, reestablish few of the key ideas that we traced through in episode 5, 6, and 7 that were actually recorded as one long conversation and were chunked down to those 3 parts. And then that essentially will be describing some of the key premises in the way we are telling and unfolding the story of the epoch. And then invite you to talk a little bit about your experience in just participating in this live exploration. And then use that foundation to reestablish some of the key ideas we framed in episode 12, where we described, with Kyriaki's help, living in Athens, what the Acropolis was, and also then framed what Acropolis work can be viewed to be today. And I'm going to just very quickly, very swiftly bring a few of those slides and then use this as a launching pad to describe a body of work that started to emerge over the weekend when we were together with the Epoch network, and we started to describe and decode indeed what we're describing as the current of the epoch through the core domains of life. And the sense of this is that we are just seeding and starting something that is much broader and invites more work. So that's the outline. And why, if you just started watching this, you want to stay with us to the latter part of the conversation, because that's where we are unpacking and exploring this idea of decoding the current of the epoch. So the brief the brief story, the brief context is that on a call, on a meeting a few weeks ago, I said almost in passing that this was with a smaller group, a part of the Epoch network. I said almost in passing that to decode the current of the epoch, one way to do so was that one could choose to focus on any of the core domains of life, be it business, be it medicine and health, be it leadership, be it innovation frontiers, be it arts, any of the core domains of life, and look to decode what we are describing as the sevenfold natures through those domains, especially with people that are on the leading edge of these domains. So, and I received a question that asked me about the way to do that and how to explore this premise. And spontaneously, that's what we did over the weekend. So that's what we are about to try to do to take the work forward. The other important context is to say that obviously the way I am sherpaing this inquiry, this exploration with the Epoch network, this is not me sitting in some university and building course material for some academic course. If this was the premise, then it will be probably done very differently. So I have spoken on a number of occasions, and I'm describing in the Portals into the Soul work in the preamble that I was not fashioned in an academic journey. I was more fashioned in my inquiry and exploration in the trenches of life. And you could describe the Epoch network as a modern or postmodern mystery school. And the importance in saying that is that if I was a teacher in some of the major universities in the world, then I would probably be in a position to teach some of this material second, third, fourth, maybe for the 15th or the 20th time. In actual fact, all of the material, most of the material that we have explored in the Epoch network and here in the Universalis Project, it has always been one-offs. I've always done just one-off, and the luck we have is that in these conversations and in some of the conversations with Jeff Vanderkloot, it created for us a premise to capture something when it's still alive in my system and in the 24 or 48 or sometimes 72 hours, not longer than 72-hour wait, knowing that if we didn't, it probably would be largely lost for time. So this is a, rather than thinking that what we're introducing is an academic study, a better way to think about this is that this is a mystery school running revelation inside a rolling event. Why I'm saying inside a rolling event? Because again, so much of the content that we're describing is in the context of world events, some largely on the world stage in the way things are unfolding, and some in terms of those more than human realms, invisible realms of potential that are affecting human life, that we're struggling to describe, and we come up with new language as we go, as part of the description of what it is we're talking about. When we talk about more than human, it's not excluding the human, not excluding the interior human realm. It is inclusive of that and is saying that there is more than that. So that's just at the highest level of framing of the context of what brought us for today and what we're about to embark on. So let me do this. Let me bring it up. So yes, so we are, as we are saying, the Universalis Project, episode 13, decoding the current of the epoch. And I am firstly going to reassert and reestablish this idea of the sevenfold story of the epoch. But even before that, what underlies that, even as more foundational, is the idea, the recognition, the deep felt, known appreciation that life has an emergent teleology. Now, again, when I started the story of that we are narrating in episode 5, 6, and 7, one of the things we grappled there was how would you make the bridge to the scientific mind of the 21st century. And one of the tools we used there was to say that, well, science too makes a hocus pocus beginning foundational, adopts a hocus pocus beginning foundational premise such as the Big Bang, and then it develops a whole bunch of theories. What life's emergent teleology does is actually a lot more grounded in the experience of life. It simply says that the evidence of life is that it wants to forever emerge into greater, more complex, more sophisticated, more intelligent dimensions and expressions of life. So the plant life is tied to the ground, but is nevertheless establishing some kind of what will become the blueprint for a neural system in the animal kingdom, and the blood system in terms of the blueprints that life's program develops. And there is a deep trace that we're doing on this with our good friend David Price Francis in one of the current openings where we describe the planetary program. So what we're saying here is that there is a developmental evolutionary teleology in the evidence of life, and that within that we can therefore bring to focus a fascinating premise which we call the sevenfold epoch fractal and its culmination. So within the bigger story of the appearance of life on the planet, we're saying that there are successions of epochs, and that there is an epoch that we have focused on in describing the story, which is somewhere the 3,000 or 3,500 year story of this recent epoch that, if you like, from the fall of the implosion or the end of the Bronze Age and the emergence of some of the ancient cultures that we see it in and describe in the story of this epoch. And that allows us to look at a trace of development. And we are proposing, and have done so deeply in episode 6 and 7, that these 3,000 years can be viewed as an initiatory journey for human life from planetary life to gradually liberating and relaxing into the idea of universal life, which is why we are describing this as the Universalis human. So books will be written about this perhaps in the future. We are in the project of seeding those premises, and to establish this, what we also have done was to bring this idea and this premise that a sevenfold framework or process that we're describing is not a new meta theory about life. It actually is the observable nature of all natural processes. Those would be true in the natural world, where we talk about plant life and where we talk about the animal kingdom, and they will be true in any human endeavor And on one of those early episodes, I think episode 5 or episode 6, I'm describing the sevenfold process also for a human endeavor. If you start a company, or if you start any endeavor, or if you build relationships, that they go through red as the instigatory or originating phase where something new begins to arise. And the orange represent the expansion of that spark of beginning, where whatever the endeavor or the life is, it gathers greater support and expand into greater territory. And then as it expands into greater territory and greater permission, it naturally encounters the premise of yellow, where the nature of the process of yellow is realigning and orchestrating. Why realign and orchestrate at a new level? Because you expanded the territory and now you need to coordinate at a higher level that larger territory or larger space of possibility that you expanded to. And that then leads to the function of green in the sevenfold process, where the premise of green is that you have used up a certain energy in the red, orange, yellow, and now you are seeking to be renewed and regenerated, if you like, rekindled with new vitality to allow you to embark on a whole new journey. And that when you do so, you get to the point in the development and the growth of whatever it is that you're involved in as an endeavor, again, communal endeavor, business endeavor, entrepreneurial endeavor. This can also be looked at in the larger context of building of cities or countries or nations. Blue represent the phase and the process of regulating and systematizing and building the protocols and the structures, and this will become very important as we describe the decoding of the current of the epoch. And that leads us to the indigo premise, where the nature of indigo is integrate and merge and transfer know-how. And that what violet represents is a phase shift transition, where something comes to an end, something is hospiced, if you like, to die, and out of that there is a permission for a new beginning to re-emerge. So the entire premise of our work, when I said a few minutes ago that this is a running revelation inside the context of a rolling event, the entire premise is that in the way we tell the story, there is a body of insight, a body of revelation with growing summary of evidence that we have been inside the indigo-violet acceleration, the indigo-violet intensification. In no uncertain terms, certainly from the middle of the 20th century and more so into the last 3 decades of the 20th century, and then very much so in the last 2 decades. Increasingly, the later part of the 20th century, I would be in a few minutes as I do the decoding, the current of the epoch, I'll be describing as the indigo intensification. And increasingly now into violet. So that was premise 1 that we established with the sevenfold story, or really premise 2. The premise 1 was that life has its own teleology. Premise 2, that we can look at a sevenfold story within this teleology. And premise 3 is the idea of an unfolding epoch story. And premise 4, inside that, the idea that when we look at the story of the epoch, we are viewing and scanning world events. That's where we see the transition of the epoch. That's the his story, the history, and that there are the more than human realms where we are seeking to sensitize ourselves, attune to those realms to tell a story that's still alive. And the premise there is that there is a way in which we can seek to contemplate and meditate and attune to the ancient Greek philosophers, or even the ancient Egyptian culture, or to the Middle Ages, or to the time of the Renaissance. And the life that these people lived and the parts that's written in history is great, but the energetic content, the lived experience, very much from the understanding of quantum physics, that energy has not been destroyed, has not been eliminated. That energetic content, those memories, those feelings, those sentiments, those states, they are encapsulated in time. And to the degree that we choose to become attuned to some of those people and the times they live, there is a way in which they trickle down to us some aspect of some quality of the nature of their experience. So that is what we are seeking to tell as the hair story. And so with that, therefore the following premise, which is over and above and in addition to the epoch transition, the written story of history, the more than human realms as the hair story, there is the human response throughout all those ages, including in today, where we are saying that the sevenfold story is a revolving fractal rather than a linear story of history. That is to say, in each time we will find a way to emphasize certain natures. In a minute I will codify again the natures in the epochal context. And yet we can also say that when you look at a blue time, even in a blue time, there are red and orange and yellow and green fractals, as is the case with indigo and violet. So there are ways in which we continue to cross-pollinate and discover new dimensions in this ongoing inquiry and contemplation that are absolutely non-linear, but rather revelatory in this fractaled way. So that is, if I didn't lose my count here, the sixth premise that we established. And the one more premise is that, so very similar to what we looked at, but framed slightly in the context of the epochal story, the sevenfold epoch transition story. And I'll demonstrate why we are describing that it is a non-linear trace, because one of the places we point to with the idea of red, of an originating covenant and impulse of the epoch, one of the places it's not the only, but one of the places we can go to is the ancient Egyptian culture. Because when you study ancient Egyptian art, one of the clear indications you're getting is that it was a very purposeful culture. You don't see those faces smiling. You hardly or never can you see teeth. They were, in that sense, representing a communication that was not with a spoken word very much, but was fashioned in a different way. And it represents an orientation that is purposeful and the significance of all the extraordinary findings in the ancient Egyptian culture, the pyramids and more, which still to this day, those remains represent one of the not fully explained mysteries of the ancient world. So we are using, not to say that red is defined by the ancient Egyptian culture, but that in the evidence of the ancient Egyptian culture, we can find this idea that this planet, in its cosmology in the galaxy and its function as the cradle for evolving conscious life, finds a unique emergence of a new epoch and its initiation for conscious human life, an evidence of the nature of red and its singular purposeful orientation is emergent in red. A pattern that we see with orange is how orange offers the nourishment and the expanding the territory and takes the nascent arising and builds support. And of course, as the ancient Egyptian culture was declining, it itself exhibited some aspects of orange, because we often find that when an endeavor expands, it either finds its way to yellow and green, where it renews itself, or it really goes through decline, which another way to describe that, it goes quickly from its arising all the way through to a violet conclusion, where it concludes and finds no way to renew itself. A good example for the establishment of the pattern of orange is the story of Rome, the city of Rome, and how the city of Rome expanded to become the Roman Empire throughout the Mediterranean and large parts of Europe. And so that is an example of how something that arose in the first place expressed the orange pattern. Yellow represents, as we said, the reorchestrating alignment and a connection to a higher principle. And one of the ways to see in the ancient world the yellow pattern is how a barbarous world finds, both in the East and the West, along a 1,000-year journey, the arising of the axial religions. Axial religions in one way in the East and in other ways in the West. They represented in several places a way in which the human experience could transition from the barbarous tone that entered the proceedings of human life to organize around a story and a way of ritualizing and sermonizing a large group of people around a certain set of beliefs and stories and myth. I emphasize large groups of people because somebody listening to this could say, well, you left out the even more ancient tribal cultures. The answer to which is correct. That is, if you like, a story that was part of the previous epoch. And yes, some of that epoch left its gift to us into the current epoch. But we are seeing the emergence of yellow, again, in the ancient world through the rise of axial religions. Green is a pattern and a fractal that brings regeneration and renewal and the initiation and individuation process in this epoch. We trace in the ancient world some of the early natures of the green fractal to ancient Greece, and to, in one way, Socrates and Plato, and what the ancient mystery schools in ancient Greece represented as a way for people to travel to experience something that will rekindle and re-energize them about a whole new dimension of life. We then see a new fractal of green with the rise of the Renaissance after the Dark Ages, and especially after the Black Plague. So what we have there is the description of what I earlier narrated as the exhaustion or the using up of certain energy that something else needed to kindle and rekindle, and that was the appearance of green. Blue represents in the epochal story any time where the influence that's arising is now we need to balance polar energies, polar pulls and pushes, people that push in one direction and people that push in another direction, and is often where warring parts come to develop a set of agreements all the way to I'm about to say the Constitution, the American Constitution, but if you like, an earlier marker of the blue fractal is the agreement that founded the idea of a Bill of Rights in the Magna Carta, appearing in the UK if I remember right, in the 1200s. So what you have is this blue nature, blue fractal, that is to do with systemizing and coordinating and building agreements and finding ways to bring peace and agreement and reconciliation into conflict, all the way to the establishment of city-states and countries, and all the way to the modern blue system. The modern world is very much a project that came riding on the blue wave. That was the carrier wave of the modern world, all the way from the seminal moment of the Constitutional Convention that established the United States of America. I view that to be a founding modern, early modern blue wave moment, and we will describe later in greater details how the blue manifest into through the Industrial Revolution and into the 20th century to the modern blue nature, which is expressed itself after the Second World War with the establishment of the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the Bretton Woods agreements. This is if you like, the 20th century seminal blue moment. The sense of this is that we have been in indigo integration and merging and transference in many ways over the last several decades. At the same time, there are examples of the indigo fractal appearing even in the ancient world, because the rise of metropolitan cities, the rise of cities in the ancient world themselves represented an indigo integration and merging. Although the reductionist way of telling history tells us that people got together in cities because it made economic sense, because they could do more efficiently the bartering trade, we propose that that's the exoteric view of the rise of cities. There was a whole other dimension into the rise of cities, and it has to do with the intensification and the growing complexification that occurs where more humans endeavor together, and that in itself is an early indigo impulse that's built in to the teleology of the epoch. Violet is represented in that any time a great endeavor or a great civilization comes to an end, it comes to an end through a violet phase, sometimes also with a violent dimension, but not always with a violent. But there is a curious realization in that the word violet and the word violence are quite close to each other. So that's the arcing story, and it was on that and in that context that I said, well, there is a way to decode the story through all the core domains of life, in that we are seeking to appreciate forever how new permissions appear in each of those, through each of those fractals, and how they take shape and get expressed, possibly if there is a response on the natural line of development, or how on certain occasions they get expressed on what we describe as the condition line, where the same potency, the same blueprint, the same permission is used, but it is not necessarily utilized in the example or in the context of the advancing of the betterment of human possibility. The current example, of course, is when we look at, to jump to the end and then retrace to it, the current example would be that the way social media and the internet were used and evolved over the last couple of decades, that is by itself a fantastic indigo phenomenon, because it becomes the most potent theater of merging and transference. An earlier expression of merging and transference in the economic arena would be the rise of exchanges that arose in the 1700s and the 1800s in the Netherlands, in UK, and then in America. So those were some early examples of how the potency and the fractal of indigo was taken to be expressed as a new commercial and economic tool. The internet represents the advancement of that in the currency of today, and we're seeing that a lot of what has been using the unfolding possibility and power of social media and the internet has very much been on the condition line, and has created more pain, more trauma, certainly to young people, to youth, and we're dealing with the consequences of that. So the internet is a wonderful thing, allowed so many things, including for us to connect in this way, and also unlocked tremendous amount of pain in the way it impacts younger generation, smartphones and a whole lot. So what we are seeing is that throughout the unfolding story of humanity, we're forever needing to metabolize any new permission through the below the line possibilities that it opens to us to dialyze these, and when we do so effectively, we can forward the human story. So evolution is a story of making half a step forward and upward, and a step and a half or two backward and downward, as we now see, for example, with leadership regressing to more authoritarian leadership in some places around the world. That is just the example of the non-linear nature of the evolutionary story. And it was because of that, because of the awareness that these impulses are forever part of the teleology of life, which is that there is the natural line that opens new possibilities to unfold the human story and the broader story of life in the universe, and then that it has its teleology pool to translate those new permissions, new possibilities, new perceptions with new connected intelligence and power. And there are also, in parallel to that, how those possibilities and permissions get used to create greater and faster and more potent capacity for destruction, anti-life. So the story of the evolution of life is accompanied by the story of the development of the capacity to destroy life. All that is part of the unfolding story, and the reason we feel so compelled to tell this story and bring the consciousness of this story into being is that there is an awareness that when we bring consciousness to this story, we may intensify and unlock capacities to metabolize with greater safety and dialysize those lower, below the line applications to release, very much in the way we're describing here, this idea that for humanity to truly, well, first of all, avoid the several civilizational risks and release those, we've got to do both the healing and liberation work, at all the levels, the level of the individual, the level of the group, and the level of the tribe and the nation. We've got to do the healing liberation work, and we've got to do the developmental evolutionary work. We've got to, at all the scales, engage with that, but that permission to do these two levels of work. But we can only do so when there is a nucleus that begins somewhere, and the nucleus begins with individuals. And so that's the compelling reason why we're telling this story as part of the Portals Project, because the Portals Project in the first place emerged in response to the question, where does the future reveal itself? And we're seeing the future reveals itself in all these places, and we have to build safety and do the work below the line and do the work above the line, so in the evolutionary work. So I would place that on this slide as a way of metabolizing each of the dimensions of the sevenfold structure, sevenfold story of the epoch, because each of those histories need to be acknowledged, need to be processed, need to be metabolized, need to be harvested to the best of what it brought, such that it become part of the crown of humanity seeking a new next phase for its development. So that took us 45 minutes, and I thought it was going to take us 15-20 minutes, but it tells you how unrealistic I am. So we're going to do something different to what I plan to do. We are going to ask you to offer some comments about the experience of being in this exploration over the last 4 or 5 years. We're going to end this part here and do a second part that will break it into 2 conversations. So please, I attempted to briefly harvest some key elements from the exploration we've been on over the last 5 years, what would you want to offer by way of a salient nature of your own experience, being part of the exploration of this journey?
I can go first. I'll try to be short. This was an excellent summary and weaving together conversations, the conversations we had in the Homo Universalis Project, 5, 6, and 7. So that was an excellent weaving of the various threads. And one of the things that I realized in this going through this journey is that this is not a linear thing. This is not one epoch building upon the other. This is not the way I studied history in the university. It was really putting in boxes every epoch, seeing the trends, and it was a bit dead. And the scientism influence, of course, was affecting the way we were approaching it. But this is a whole live unfolding where everything is connected, and you can see the yellow reappearing, let's say, the religious aspects reappearing with Protestants again, or in other epochs, or the green again reappearing, we can say, with the modern Olympics, or in other facets. And everything is connected, everything is alive, and it's not just the story of the victors, but her story has to do with what is also in the collective unconscious, in the collective depository, and it's in us. It's something that is in us, it can be activated. And also another thing that I realize is that we are not here alone, spinning in this planet, but there somehow is a greater intelligence that is accompanying us, it's helping us, it's going somewhere. There is a higher orchestration that is maybe guiding this awakening. And in trying to see the purpose of the epoch, because we said we are researching what is the purpose of the epoch, the 3,500 last years. What is the purpose of this programming? I see that maybe one of the purpose was to develop more the mental portal, what we call the mental portal, and the sensory portal, because we said there are 3 portals of knowledge. But maybe now there was also underlying this a slow awakening of the spiritual portal, which is now becoming more potent. So that's what would I say.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a very, very comprehensive overview. Everything I jotted down to say has been beautifully covered. So I think the aspect I'll come at it is really, you talked about the consciousness and the individual, and that's who we are. We're conscious individuals. So our journey is from that perspective. And I was thinking that every human that's born on the planet, that the human design has enough. It's designed in such a way that every life can have a spiritual journey, can have a connective, purposeful life. And we're all born into this unfolding epoch, and it's a long trajectory, even though there are different fractals. We're predominantly born into the blue, nudging into the indigo. So we have that choice. First of all, we need to be aware of it, which is the wonder of these recordings and this journey. Because if we become aware of it and we opt in or self-elect into being consciously mindful of these different potencies, progressions, then we're saying that we can co-join evolution and human update. So we have that, in a way, once you become aware of something, the two, awareness and responsibility, go very close together. When you're aware of something, you can't pretend you're not. And so when you see this greater story, and what an amazing story it is, then the second question becomes, well, how do I become more aware of it? And how do I integrate my life within it to co-join it and develop the capacities and the awareness? And I think that's where the sharing of experience would be in actually, I've been working recently with a group where we've been on a deeper dive, as it were, to exploring these different colors and natures and potencies. And the extraordinary thing is that as our awareness expands, it's not, as we said right at the beginning, it's not an academic thing. The intelligences of each will have their way. And it's been quite extraordinary how, we started in red, which was looking at our principles and our reasoning for engaging in this work. And then as we moved into orange and expanded, we had to think about where we wanted to go and what boundaries we wanted to put in. And it wasn't as if we sat there and thought about it. Suddenly it went everywhere. And we thought, well, this we can't cover this. We can't manage this. So where are we going? And then as we went into yellow, it was very apparent. People said, well, what are we doing? We had to really regather around the core principles and reorchestrate to really take the next step. And then the green was it being more experimental and trying things out and looking at a whole dimension of what the arts can be. And then as we moved into blue, suddenly there was an issue that could have fragmented quite easily, but the intelligences said, hey, this needs time spent with agreements to have some cohesion. And it was like a balm. It was like we need to do this. And we haven't got to indigo yet, so I will tell you that story when we get there. Because the importance of this story was that we didn't plan it. It became a live, living experience, and it's been challenging, but utterly rewarding because we're experiencing something that is going somewhere. It has a trajectory. It has a trajectory to do with evolution and to do with, at core, in my mind, the core kind of the axiomatic nature is about integration, and it's about the progressive steps the human takes to greater integration with the universe, which isn't something you can intellectualize about or fantasize about. You have to actually find the territory and work it. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, quite beautiful, Karen, because what you described was how this sevenfold living intelligence guided you before you even knew that it was going to be so. So, in other words, what your story conveys is very much the sense of the journey in the exterior. In the exterior is the journey in the interior. What we are exploring in the world is what we are exploring in ourselves. It was said, as above, so below. And therefore, the below can teach us also about the above. When you want to study man, study the universe. If you want to study the universe, study human being. So you have demonstrated that. And we will now pause this and do what I promised we will do at the beginning on the next episode 14, where we go into decoding the current of the epoch in all the core domains of life. Thank you. See you on the next episode.
Thank you. See you. See you soon.
Yes. See you soon. Bye.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.